Hey everybody, consider this more of an administrative or housekeeping episode of the Egypt Travel Podcast, with some major updates about travel to and around Egypt in the summer and fall of 2021, just in case you've come across this episode at some point in the distant future. Now, the first thing I want to let you know is if you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts or anywhere in audio format, well, I've got a surprise for you. This is actually the audio feed of a new video version of the Egypt Travel Podcast that I'm launching now with this latest episode. The video version of the Egypt Travel Podcast will be available in Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts shortly. But if you're tuning in right after this episode comes out and you can't wait for the new Egypt Travel Podcast video feed to come out, well, just go to egypttravelblog.com/video podcast and you'll be able to find the video of me recording this podcast live. So if you haven't traveled to Egypt with me yet, or done a Zoom call with me as a client, or met up with me at one of Egypt Elite's in-person meetups around the USA or Canada yet, and you're curious to put a face with a name, then just go to egypttravelblog.com/video podcast and you'll be able to see the video of this episode. It's nothing fancy, it's just me talking into the camera and delivering critical and interesting updates on Egypt for the summer and fall of 2021, but at least it adds another dimension to you getting to know me and seeing a more multi-dimensional side of the Egypt Elite operation, which if you're a client of ours already, you'll know is very important to me and our team in Egypt. Okay, so now on to the updates about Egypt. As international travel is opening back up big time this year following the very successful mass vaccination campaigns in most developed countries around the world so far, bookings for bucket list and trip of a lifetime trips to Egypt, and I'm sure other destinations too, are absolutely through the roof. I seriously thought that travel to Egypt might start to bounce back, I don't know, in late 2021, early 2022, but as of January 2021, we have been slammed with requests for big ticket trips. Of course, my company Egypt Elite specializes in higher end luxury trips, which are often more affordable than most people think, by the way. So the fact that even we are booking up for many weeks in late 2021 and early 2022 already, especially given that this is high season, tells me that people in the West are ready to get back in the air and on the road and on the go, that they've been saving up and that they are just ready to just go all out on trips of a lifetime to places like Egypt. Because hey, I think this past year has driven home the point to all of us that being able to get out and see and experience the world itself is a luxury. And it can quickly and easily be taken away from us, either by a global pandemic like we experienced last year, or by getting struck ourselves by viral plague, or even becoming victim to financial ruin caused by all this mess, as happened to many people, unfortunately. Getting off the couch and out of the house and into the air to hit your bucket list travel destinations is more of a priority now than it has ever been. And we're seeing that reflected in the huge spike in numbers of people who want to go to Egypt reaching out to us to travel there and have us host them and help them on those visits. Okay, so anyway, let's talk about what's going on the ground in Egypt this year, and more specifically this season. Right now, it is the middle of September 2021. And we are just about to come out of what we in Egypt generally refer to as the low season for tourism in normal years, which is the hot summer months. Egypt Elite restarted its operations on the ground in Egypt in March of this year, 2021. We hosted our first post-travel shutdown clients in the middle of March. We even had them on this podcast earlier this year to talk about what it was like returning to Egypt fairly early by most standards and taking advantage of there being still very few tourists traveling to places like Egypt at the time. After that, let's see, we had a sprinkle of clients in May and June and July, and I myself returned to Egypt for the first time in a year and a half just this past June and spent about 5 weeks there. We had clients there in the country then who were eager enough to travel and wanted to see Egypt despite the fear that many others still had. And it was a true pleasure to be able to be with them and see them, and just to see that they were saying over and over they were so glad they came and didn't listen to the naysayers. There was also an overarching theme among our clients who visited Egypt over the summer that the experience was much more relaxed, safer, and better than they imagined it would be, given the circumstances. Things are pretty much back to normal in Egypt now, with everyone in the tourism industry having adopted a new normal in terms of safety and hygiene. And they honestly look at places like the US that have these, 24-hour for-profit news channels that need to fill all hours of the day and night with coronavirus hysteria, and they just kind of roll their eyes, to be honest. Egyptians are used to dealing with that phenomenon. Keep that in mind. Because it was the same thing during the Arab Spring or anytime there's any sort of incident in the entire Middle Eastern region. American news is filled 24 hours a day with sensationalist coverage, repeat headlines, stock footage on repeat over and over to keep eyeballs glued to the screen, advertiser dollars flowing in. And meanwhile, life just continues on peacefully and normally and safely in places like Egypt. I want to give everyone a full report on my first post-pandemic trip back to Egypt this summer in June and July, okay? Now first, let me just clarify that when I say post-pandemic, I know that now in September of 2021, COVID is still a problem in many places around the world, especially in the United States, where literally everyone and their dog has access to the vaccine, but a full quarter of the population there still seems to refuse to get it. I don't know, I'm not going to comment on that, but in the rest of the world, people are gobbling up vaccines literally as fast as they can get their hands on them. So outside of the United States, things are actually getting much better fast. In Egypt, the country has largely been dependent on vaccine donations purchased from abroad, and they've been prioritizing the distribution of those vaccines to healthcare workers, public sector workers, vulnerable citizens, and tourism industry workers, since a healthy tourism industry, both literally and figuratively, is vital to Egypt's national interests. Remember, Egypt is also, how do we say, it's also a little authoritarian in nature, let's just say. So it can mandate that people have the vaccine, unlike countries in the West that have to rely on the willingness of people to get vaccinated. So vaccination against COVID is mandatory and required by law for workers in the tourism industry, and the country has already achieved 100% vaccination rates for the tourism sector workers in some governance, with the country's tourism workers expected to be 100% vaccinated by the end of this month. That's the goal. So I would actually argue that places like Europe and the Middle East are actually much safer for people to be than in the United States, where a full quarter of the population in the US refuses to get vaccinated, despite vaccines literally being available to everyone and their dog already. Wish my dog could get a vaccine. Okay, here's another thing to keep in mind about the Middle East that many people, I think, in the West don't realize. Sure, the region is gritty and dusty by nature, by virtue of its geography, but 90% of Egypt is Muslim, and one of the requirements of the Muslim faith is that they have to thoroughly wash their hands and forearms and face 5 times a day before they pray. Whereas we in the West, we struggle to get people to wash their hands once or twice a day. In Egypt, the overwhelming majority of the population practiced thorough hand and face washing 5 times a day already just for prayers, in addition to, hygienic washing before eating, and now even a little bit more extra because of COVID. This is just a personal theory of mine, but I've always thought that that's one of the reasons the rates of viral spread in the Middle East remained relatively low compared with Western and non-Muslim countries, despite the population density of Middle Eastern countries. You didn't have to have huge public education campaigns about washing your hands and keeping clean there, because they already did it 5 to 6 times a day by default, more so than Western countries did. Okay, now back to the updates. As I mentioned, 100% of the tourism industry workers in Egypt are expected to be vaccinated by the end of September, and tourist sites have remained open this entire time, even if they had fewer tourists visiting them. Trust me when I say that no one has to worry about any sites being closed again in Egypt. They are not going back to that ever. They can't. They depend too heavily on tourism and literally cannot afford to see it stopped again, at least not on their part. They'll also do absolutely everything they can to make sure travel there is safe, because they want tourists to feel safe and welcome. Despite the 100% vaccination rate among tourism industry workers at the Red Sea resorts already, for example, they all still wear face masks, and they're continuing to do social distancing practices as a matter of both courtesy and comfort for everyone visiting. And I would bet that this will continue pretty much for the rest of the year and into 2022 everywhere else in Egypt, despite the progress and success of the strategic priority vaccination campaigns there. Okay, let's move on from the topic of COVID that I know everyone else is thoroughly tired of hearing and talking about, and especially dealing with. There's a lot of other really positive things that have been happening in Egypt during the tourism slowdown of the past year and a half, and I'm really excited to tell all of you about them. First, the government of Egypt has been very proactive in using this tourism downtime in 2020 and early 2021 to work on some development projects that had long been delayed or which were just proceeding slowly so that tourism wouldn't be too greatly impacted or inhibited in previous years. For example, they've built a lot of new highways and bridges, especially in and around Cairo. Now, this is huge for the tourism industry because whereas we used to have to sometimes drive through local neighborhoods or through crowded small local streets to get to certain places or sites, now we're able to just breeze through them on new elevated highways and bridges over congested areas in central Cairo and Giza. Now, some of this is still a work in progress, but enough is already open so that you can really get a sense of how much Egypt is moving itself into the 21st century, finally, in terms of infrastructure. This new development is also preparing the way for the inevitable exponential surge in tourism that's expected both when the pandemic finally ends everywhere in the world and when the Grand Egyptian Museum finally opens. I'll do another episode on updates about the gem very soon, and I won't go into that too much here for our purposes today. But let me just say that in this episode that both tourism companies and the Egyptian government are expecting a huge boom in bookings and visits the minute the gem opening announcement is made. Now, here's some advice that you should consider heeding if you're one of those waiting for the gem to open to plan your travel to Egypt after that. You are in a bucket with literally about 5 to 10 million other people around the world who are waiting for the exact same announcement and then planning to book their trips thereafter. Have you ever been at a train station in a major city, for example, or even an airport in places like Europe where they don't announce the departure gate until about 30 or 40 minutes before the flight, or even less in the case of trains, sometimes 5 to 10 minutes before the train? You know how everyone is crowded around the departures board just waiting for the gate or platform number to appear? And then the precise second it appears, there's this enormous eruption of activity as everyone scrambles and rushes to get to that gate or platform first to get in line or get a place on the plane or get your luggage space or your seats if they're unassigned or whatever the case may be. Well, that's currently what's going on with the build-up to the gem situation in Egypt. Egypt normally gets about 10 to 18 million touristic visitors per year in normal times. Even during COVID times, it was still getting millions of tourists visiting. So imagine as soon as the gem opening announcement is made, which is inevitably going to be for when pandemic era travel restrictions come to a close or a near close so that foreign dignitaries can travel to Egypt for the opening ceremonies and events. Okay, not only is travel to Egypt going to bounce back to normal levels of more than 15, 16, 17 million visitors per year, but there's going to be a significant gem boost to the numbers in the first 16 to 18 months after the opening date as people who've been waiting for that announcement rush to use the previous metaphor, get to the gate first. But what a lot of people don't realize is two things. First, they don't realize that so many other people around the world are waiting to do exactly what they're planning to do, that is visit Egypt in the immediate year or two after the new gem opens. Second, very few people, except us insiders who know the hospitality industry in Egypt intimately well, realize that the hotel and tourism service infrastructure in Egypt is nowhere near caught up to having the capacity to host double or triple the number of tourists yet. The most significant manifestation of this will be in the hotel room inventory in Egypt. Egypt is busy trying to build new hotels for foreign visitors, but they've also had to take some hotel inventory offline also to make way for new building projects like the roads and bridges I was talking about earlier. For example, the Le Méridien Hotel out by the pyramids, which was pretty crappy to begin with in my opinion, but still a major Western branded hotel, that had to be closed and will be demolished to make way for a new Giza metro station, which itself probably won't even open for another 3 to 5 years. There are a few brand new super luxe 5-star hotels that have opened recently or will open in the next year or two, such as the new St. Regis property downtown in Cairo. But the other new 5-star hotels are being built out in the vicinity of the new administrative capital that they're building about an hour and a half east of downtown Cairo, or in New Cairo, which is in the eastern suburbs as well, which won't help tourist visitors because The pyramids and the Sphinx, which everyone has to see, are 45 minutes west of downtown, meaning those sites wouldn't be anywhere near all of the new hotel room inventory being built for the new capital city to the east. So all of this is to break the news to everyone that it's my prediction, which I like to think is a pretty well-informed one, that hotel room availability in Egypt is going to become somewhat of a scarce commodity in late 2022 and all of 2023, which means two things. First, it's going to book up well in advance. And second, prices are going to significantly skyrocket the minute the gym announcement is made. In addition to hotel rooms, the same phenomenon is going to happen to the best tour companies in Egypt. The good ones, meaning the non-scammy ones and the ones that limit their available booking slots and don't just take anyone and their brother and subcontract it all out to others but don't tell you, the good ones are going to book up well in advance too. My company, Egypt Elite, is already having to take some weeks off the market in 2022 because we're getting booked up now. And high season, which is October through March, will be particularly scarce. So my best advice to anyone who is waiting for the gym opening date is to do two things. One, don't wait until even a few months out from your planned trip to book something with a company. Don't wait until even just 6 months before your trip if you can help it. If you know you want to go to Egypt at some point in the next 2 years, start preliminarily planning your trip now. Start thinking about the season you want to go, or better yet, the specific month you want to go. Start thinking through your desired itinerary, the sites, the cities, the places you want to be sure to visit on your trip. Then get an idea of the number of days you'll have available in country. Now, this last part is particularly important because I can't tell you how many times I get trip proposal requests from prospective clients through our website's trip builder feature, and people say, I want to visit the pyramids and the Sphinx and all of downtown Cairo and the two new museums with the pharaonic treasures and the mummies, the tombs and temples in Luxor, Aswan, Abu Simbel, the Red Sea, and I have about 6 or 7 days to do it all. Or even worse, people say, I want to do all of that plus tack on an add-on excursion to go visit Petra in Jordan, and I want to do all that in about 7 or 8 days. That's possible, right? Well, the big answer is no. You can't realistically do all of Egypt, and especially a Jordan add-on in just a week. 2 weeks, okay, we can work with that, but unless you're planning to take speed all week and not sleep, such itineraries and timelines just are not realistic. You need a good 8 to 10 days to do all of Egypt at a minimum. Maybe 7 to 8 if you're just doing Cairo, Giza, and Luxor. But if you're planning to visit Egypt only once and you want to see all the major sites and cities, 10 to 14 days is more realistic of a time frame in order to pace out the trip moderately and not kill yourself along the way. Okay, the second thing you need to consider, and do this sooner rather than later, is go on and at least get on the books of the company you want to work with for your trip around Egypt. As I said earlier, our slots are 100% for sure going to book up well in advance for the year after the gym is scheduled to open once that announcement is made. And hotels and even domestic flights will book up quickly for that time period as well. You don't want to, you don't have to have all of your trip details ironed out to do a preliminary booking. You just need to know that you want to go to Egypt at some point in the future. You can put a deposit down to guarantee you're in the door with us or whoever you want to work with so that you don't get turned away in the future and end up with some scammy bottom of the barrel tour operator. Now, I'm not sure how other companies do it, but we do allow our booked clients to not have to firm up their itinerary completely when they book with us. We even allow them to postpone trips multiple times, and we guarantee we'll still save the slots for you for future dates if you are already booked with us, if you're on our books. So that's just my 2 cents about what the Egypt touring landscape will look like for the next 12 to 24 months, and especially in the 6 to 18 months following the announcement of the gym opening date. Okay, so now let's talk about some new things that have opened up in Egypt already for those who need to go or are going or planning to go to Egypt even before the gym opens. The gym is certainly a highly anticipated new addition to our itineraries for first-time Egypt visitors, but it's not the be-all, end-all. We have plenty of people who want to go to Egypt now, as in the second half of 2021 and early 2022, and they're still not missing much even if the gym isn't open when they're traveling there. For example, most of Egypt's ancient collections, including the Pharaonic Gold Collection, the Royal Mummy Collection, These will still be on display at the old Museum of Egyptian Antiquities downtown and the new Museum of Egyptian Civilization, which we call the NEMC, NMEC for short, in South Cairo. Many people have missed the opening of the NEMC actually because it's been overshadowed by anticipation about the gem. But the NEMC is another beautiful modern new museum that opened in April of this year, 2021, and which now houses the Royal Mummy Collection, or the real bodies and mummies of all of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, except King Tut, which is still entombed down in his original tomb down in Luxor, and which you can still see there in the Valley of the Kings. Don't worry. He actually may be transferred up to Cairo in the future, but for now he's still in a special temperature-controlled glass case inside of his original tomb down in Luxor. So even for those visiting now, you still get to see a ton of King Tut's gold, his famous gold burial mask, more hieroglyphic carvings and sarcophagi and statues and other artifacts than you'll ever have time to see, plus the mummies, even without the gem being open. So that's why a lot of people are just saying, screw it, I'm not waiting for the gem to open when I can still see all of this stuff even before it's done. So it's just up to you as to whether you want to wait until the gem opens in the future or not and go now. Another venue that they finished and opened up is an amazing new chic restaurant and lounge overlooking the entire Giza Plateau called the Nine Pyramids Lounge. If you'll recall, there are 3 King's Pyramids and 6 small Queen's Pyramids at Giza for a grand total of 9 pyramids that you can still see. And you have fantastic vistas of all of them from the new Nine Pyramids Lounge. Many people like to go over to the Marriott Mina House Hotel beside the pyramids for lunch with a pyramid's view. They have gardens, but now that this new restaurant is open, it is a much better option and has much better views of the pyramids. Also, the food is actually surprisingly really superb. I expected the food there to only be mediocre because, they have a monopoly, on the best views in Giza. But both me and my Egyptian friends who went there several times this summer were all impressed by how delicious their food was. It's all Egyptian food, and it's really, really well done and very high quality. The first time I went here to the Nine Pyramids Lounge was actually for a meeting with the restaurant manager. And I really kind of wanted to feel him out, feel out the restaurant for whether this was destined to become some cheesy tourist trap or something like that. And I was really impressed with how they're running the place. It's actually kind of exclusive, and you have to have a reservation to even access the road that leads up to this place. It's also the only restaurant within the Giza Pyramids complex. And there's essentially a doorman, or kind of a roadman really, since you have to get to him by way of an access road to get to the door of the restaurant. But he checks the list to see if you're authorized to go to this restaurant. In other words, if you have a reservation. So it's not a place that's just letting anyone go up and wander over there to check out the views or take pictures from the best pyramids overlooking Giza. You have to have a reservation to get anywhere near it, and it's totally worth it. After that initial visit, I went back several times unannounced to check it out again and again, and it always delivered a consistent quality experience, and the food was great every time I went. I really, really liked it. So this is one of the new gyms, small g, that opened during the past year and a half and is going to be a must-do for all of our clients now to relax and have an amazing lunch overlooking the pyramids after spending a few hours exploring them up close. Now let me talk about one more new place that opened during the pandemic last year, and which was new to me this summer and would be new to anyone else who hasn't been to Egypt lately. It's in Luxor, and for years the only 5-star hotel in Luxor has been the Luxor Hilton. Many people think that the Winter Palace Hotel is nice because they read stories about it or are suckered into thinking it's some ritzy hotel. But the reality when you get there is that the Winter Palace is not. The only other decent hotels in Luxor are 3- and 4-star properties, but those service more of sort of the mass tourism groups. But up until now, the only truly nice hotel in Luxor was the Luxor Hilton. Well, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that the new place, called Jorf Palace, has opened up on the western bank of the Nile, just slightly south of downtown Luxor. I wouldn't normally recommend that anyone stay on the west bank, but this new property is right on the water, it's right on the river, and it has an on-demand shuttle boat for getting across to the East Bank and downtown Luxor at any time. It's an absolutely gorgeous place, a true gem on the Nile, and it's very different from the Hilton in that the Hilton is a resort property with a spa and 24-hour room service, And although it's still very nice and unique on the banks of the Nile, it's still a very much a Western style hotel. You know, Dwarf Palace, on the other hand, is very locally flavored in style and decor, but it's Western run and it's very upscale and exquisite and unique. When I heard about this place, I had to go check it out. I made an appointment to go over to the property in order to meet the owner and tour the grounds and rooms. And when I showed up, I immediately fell in love with Marina, who is the English woman who built the place with her late husband over 10 years. And she now runs it with her Egyptian husband, who's also a really, really nice guy. Marina has lived all over the Middle East and Africa for about 5 decades, and she is full of amazing stories from her time in Egypt and Morocco and Malawi and Jordan and everywhere else. She's just one of the most amazing amenities of this place, actually. She's always around and supervising things personally and interacting with guests, and I think you'll love her if you stay there as much as I do now. The restaurant here, too, is under an outdoor terrace by the pool, and the chef goes to the market every morning to buy fresh ingredients to prepare the day's meals. So the menu to the restaurant changes every day and is very local and fresh. I also returned here several times unannounced to eat at the restaurant and check out the grounds, and I was really surprised by how delicious and unique the dishes were at the restaurant. I also stayed here with some of my local staff several weeks later, and I can really tell you that the upscale and high quality experience I sensed when I first visited this property was indeed consistent every time I came here. Oh, and the other unique thing about Dwarf Palace is its architecture and decor. It is exquisitely arabesque, and all of the woodwork and decoration is custom made. In fact, each of the rooms is distinct from all the others. They only have 18 rooms in the whole property. So it's more of like a larger local guest house, but with 5-star exquisite upscale quality. I've actually already switched several of Egypt Elite's future groups over to this property, and I intend to recommend and offer it to new clients moving forward, in addition to continuing to suggest the Luxor Hilton for those who prefer a Western-style resort and spa experience in Luxor. All right, there is a lot more to report and update you on now that Egypt has had a year and a half to make rapid developments and improvements, which are still ongoing, but alas, time is nipping at my tail and I need to let you go and pick this back up in future episodes. Don't forget, go to egypttravelblog.com/video podcast if you'd like to get to see me delivering this podcast episode on video, maybe get to know me personally a little better in the process. You know, I think there's a lot of value in really humanizing these things and building trust and showing you that I'm a real person, giving you real advice on traveling to a faraway place like Egypt, which I think makes a huge difference in your comfort level going there, especially if you're traveling with us at Egypt Elite. All right, everyone, until next time, ma salama.